They laughed at him, an old man, in a red checkered shirt, sitting alone in a USMC dining hall. He didn't look like a Marine anymore. No rank, no uniform, just silence. A young sergeant stepped closer, smirking. "So tell me, old man, what kind of call sign is Rooster?" Laughter spread across the room. Forks clinked. Eyes rolled. The old man didn't flinch. He slowly looked up, and with a voice that carried decades of war, he said just one word: "Rooster." The laughter died instantly, because every Marine in that room knew that wasn't a nickname. It was a legend. And what happened next rewrote the meaning of respect forever. They noticed him because he didn't belong. At least, that's what it looked like. The USMC dining hall was loud that afternoon. Metal trays sliding, boots scraping against the polished floor, Marines laughing between bites. The air smelled of coffee and hot food, and the walls were lined with unit photos and flags that told stories most people never stopped to read. Then there was the old man. He sat alone at the far end of the hall. No uniform, no rank insignia, just a faded red checkered shirt and hands folded quietly on the table. His posture, however, told a different story. Straight back, squared shoulders, the kind of stillness that didn't come from weakness, but from discipline. A few Marines glanced his way. "Who's that?" someone whispered. "Probably lost," another muttered. The young USMC sergeant noticed him too. Fresh stripes, sharp uniform, confidence bordering on arrogance. He nudged his buddy and smirked. "Watch this." The sergeant stood and walked toward the old man, boots echoing just a bit louder than necessary. The nearby tables went quiet, not because they respected the old man, but because they sensed entertainment. The sergeant stopped beside him. "Hey," he said loudly, "this area's for Marines." The old man looked up slowly. His eyes were tired, but alert. "I know," he replied calmly. The sergeant chuckled. "Oh yeah? Then tell me, what unit were you with?" The old man paused. For a moment, it looked like he wouldn't answer. Then he said softly, "Marine Corps." Laughter broke out. The sergeant leaned closer, enjoying it. "Sure you were. So what was your call sign, old man?" A fork stopped midair. Someone whispered, "This is going too far." The old man's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. He inhaled, and in that breath was something heavy, like memories clawing their way back to the surface. He raised his head and said, "Rooster." The word didn't echo. It didn't need to, because something shifted in the room. The sergeant's smile faltered, just for a second. Across the hall, a Marine froze. Then another, because they had heard that name before. Not in jokes, not in mockery, but in stories told in whispers. About missions that never made the news. About a man who walked back when no one else did. And the room, slowly, quietly, began to understand they had made a mistake. Silence spread through the dining hall like a slow-moving shadow. The laughter that had filled the room seconds earlier died mid-breath. Trays stopped clattering. Conversations faded into uneasy whispers. The sergeant straightened up, suddenly aware that something had shifted, though he didn't yet understand what. "Rooster," he repeated, forcing a chuckle. "That's it? That's your call sign." But his voice lacked the confidence it had before. At the far table, a senior Marine, a gunnery sergeant with silver beginning to creep into his hair, had gone completely still. His fork hovered inches above his plate. His eyes were locked on the old man, wide with recognition or fear. He slowly stood. "Sir," the gunnery sergeant said, his voice tight, directed not at the old man, but at the mocking sergeant. "Step back." The young sergeant frowned. "What?" "Gunny, I was just... now." That single word carried weight. Authority. History. The sergeant stepped aside, confused, his face flushing red. All eyes turned to the gunnery sergeant as he walked toward the old man with measured steps. Not aggressive, not casual, but careful. Respectful. He stopped in front of the table and looked down. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the gunnery sergeant did something no one expected. He snapped to attention. Perfect posture, heels together, eyes forward. And then he saluted. The room sucked in a collective breath. The old man didn't return the salute immediately. His eyes flicked across the room, taking in the stunned faces, the frozen bodies, the sudden realization dawning on dozens of Marines all at once. Finally, slowly, he raised his hand and returned it. Not sharp, not flashy, but exact. The kind of salute you never forget once you've seen it. The gunnery sergeant lowered his hand, swallowing hard. "Sir," he said quietly, "permission to speak freely?" The old man nodded. "My father served in Fallujah," the gunnery sergeant continued. "He used to tell us stories about a Marine they called Rooster." A murmur rippled through the hall. "He said Rooster never raised his voice," the gunnery sergeant said. "But when things went bad, when radios went dead, when squads were pinned down," his voice cracked. "Rooster always walked out front." The old man's gaze drifted to the floor. The memories were there now, loud and unforgiving. Dust, smoke, the sound of rounds snapping past his ears. The weight of brothers he couldn't save and the ones he did. They said, the gunnery sergeant continued, that Rooster stayed behind so others could extract, that he held a corridor alone for 6 minutes under fire. 6 minutes. Every Marine in the room knew what that meant. That he refused evac, the gunny said softly, until everyone else was accounted for. The young sergeant felt his stomach drop. He looked at the old man again, really looked this time. The straight spine, the steady hands, the quiet dignity. This wasn't a lost civilian. This was a survivor. The old man finally spoke. "I wasn't special," he said calmly. "I just did my job." The gunnery sergeant shook his head. "No, sir. You did more." Chairs scraped as Marines stood, one by one. No command was given. They just knew. The room filled with the sound of boots hitting the floor in unison. Marines snapping to attention. Faces solemn now. Eyes filled with something deeper than respect. Shame. The young sergeant swallowed hard. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by a tight knot in his throat. He stepped forward slowly. "Sir," he said, voice low, "I owe you an apology." The old man looked at him, not with anger, not with pride, but with understanding. "We all learn," he replied, "just not always the easy way." And in that moment, every Marine in that dining hall understood a truth they would carry for the rest of their lives. You don't recognize legends by how loud they are. You recognize them by how quietly they carry the weight of what they've done. The gunnery sergeant remained at attention longer than protocol required. Not out of formality, but reverence. The old man shifted slightly in his chair, uncomfortable with the attention. He had faced gunfire without flinching, but this was harder. Being seen, being remembered. "Gunny," he said quietly, "you can relax." "Yes, sir," the gunnery sergeant replied, and even as he lowered his salute, his voice never lost its steadiness. The dining hall was no longer a place to eat. It had become a chamber of reckoning. The young sergeant stood frozen, heart pounding. His ears rang, not from noise, but from realization. Every word he had spoken earlier replayed in his head like a bad echo. "What kind of name is Rooster?" He took a step forward, then stopped, because another Marine had stood up. This one older, a master sergeant, face hardened by years of service. "I served with 3rd Battalion," the master sergeant said, his voice carrying across the hall. 2006. The old man's eyes lifted sharply. "Fallujah," the master sergeant swallowed. "We lost contact with 2nd Squad during a night push. Everyone thought they were gone." He paused, then looked directly at the old man. Then Rooster came back. The room leaned in. He was bleeding, the master sergeant continued. Helmet cracked, rifle empty, but he had 2 wounded Marines with him, one on each shoulder. A quiet sound escaped someone in the crowd. He didn't say a word, the master sergeant said. Just nodded once, like he was apologizing for being late. The old man closed his eyes. That night had never left him. The alley, the flare light, the sound of boots dragging across concrete slick with dust and blood. "I wasn't late," the old man said softly. "I was trying to find a 3rd one." The silence that followed was absolute. The master sergeant bowed his head. "We never knew," he said. "No," the old man replied. "You weren't supposed to." The weight of that sentence crushed the room. This wasn't a hero chasing recognition. This was a Marine who had carried ghosts quietly for decades. The young sergeant felt something break inside his chest. He stepped forward again, this time all the way. "Sir," he said, voice shaking, "I disrespected you." The old man looked up at him. Really looked. Not as a superior, not as a judge, but as a Marine looking at another Marine, still learning. "You didn't know," the old man said. "And that matters." The young sergeant swallowed hard. "It shouldn't," he replied. The old man considered him for a long moment, then nodded once. "That means you're paying attention now." The gunnery sergeant cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, why didn't you say anything sooner?" The old man leaned back slightly, hands resting on the table. "Because," he said, "rank fades. Uniforms come off. Medals end up in drawers." His eyes scanned the room. "But character? That's what stays." He stood slowly. Every Marine instinctively stepped back, giving him space. "I didn't wear this shirt today to be recognized," he continued. "I wore it because it's warm, because it's quiet, because it doesn't remind me of who I lost." The words cut deeper than any shout ever could. "I come here sometimes," he said, "to remember who I served with and to see who's still carrying the torch." His gaze returned to the young sergeant. "You dropped it for a moment," he said gently, "but you picked it back up." The sergeant nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Aye, sir." The old man reached for his tray. "I think I'll finish my meal now," he said. No one laughed. No one spoke. As he walked away, every Marine in that hall understood something profound. Legends don't demand silence. They earn it. The old man had taken only 3 steps away from the table when it happened. A sharp voice cut through the silence. "All hands, stand fast." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. That voice belonged to command. Boots snapped together across the dining hall, as if pulled by the same string. Every Marine froze in place, back straight, eyes forward. The air itself seemed to tighten. A colonel had entered. Dress uniform, silver eagles on his collar. Eyes scanning the room, not with anger, but with awareness. "Gunny," the colonel said calmly. "Report." The gunnery sergeant stepped forward, saluted. "Sir, an honor situation involving a retired Marine." The colonel's eyes shifted. They landed on the old man. And in that instant, everything changed. The colonel didn't ask questions. He didn't look confused. He removed his cover. Slowly, deliberately. Then he walked forward, past the stunned sergeant, past the tables, past the whispers, and stopped in front of the old man. "Sir," the colonel said quietly, respectfully, "permission to address you." The room nearly stopped breathing. The old man looked at him, surprised now. "You don't need my permission," he replied. "Yes, sir," the colonel said. "I do." He straightened and saluted. A full, command-level salute. Sharp, unquestionable, unmistakable. Every Marine followed instantly. The sound of dozens of boots locking into attention echoed like a single thunderclap. The old man's chest rose slowly. For the first time since he'd walked into that hall, his hands trembled. "Sir," the colonel said, lowering his salute. "My name is Colonel Hayes. I was a second lieutenant in 2006. The old man's eyes widened just slightly. "I was attached to a unit that came out alive," the colonel continued, voice steady but thick, "because someone held a corridor we couldn't." The colonel reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded paper, worn, creased, carried for years. "I've kept this," he said. "It's the after-action report." He unfolded it. "And this is the line that made me stay in the Corps." He read aloud. "Call sign Rooster remained in position under sustained fire beyond ordered extraction window. Casualties prevented. Unknown. Mission continuation. Possible only due to his actions." The colonel looked up. "That line," he said, "doesn't get taught enough." The room was silent. Not shocked now, but humbled. The colonel turned to the young sergeant. "Sergeant," he said firmly. "Yes, sir," the sergeant snapped. "Today," the colonel said, "you learned something no manual teaches." He gestured toward the old man. "You learned what quiet courage looks like." The sergeant's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir." The colonel turned back to the old man. "Sir," he said, "on behalf of this command and every Marine standing here." He paused. "Welcome home." The old man swallowed hard. He nodded once. That was all he could manage. And in that nod, Decades of silence finally found their answer. The old man didn't stay long after that. He never did. Ceremonies made him uneasy. Applause felt too loud. Praise felt too heavy. He finished his meal quietly, nodded once more to the colonel, and walked toward the exit. But this time, he didn't walk alone. Marines lined the path, not ordered, not announced, just instinctive. A living corridor of respect. Eyes forward, back straight. No phones, no whispers, no laughter, only understanding. At the door, the old man stopped. He turned back. "Marines," he said. Every head snapped toward him. "I won't tell you to be perfect," he continued. "I wasn't." He glanced down at his hands. "I won't tell you to be fearless. I was scared more times than I can count." He looked up again. "But I will tell you this." His voice was calm, certain. "Someday, you'll take this uniform off." The words hit harder than any command. "And when you do," he said, "you'll hope people judge you by how you treated others while you wore it." He nodded once. "Don't waste that chance." And then he was gone. Epilogue. Weeks later, a small plaque appeared near the dining hall entrance. No rank, no medals listed, no dates, just two words etched into steel. Rooster. Honor needs no announcement. The young sergeant stopped there every morning. Not out of guilt, out of resolve. Because some lessons aren't taught by shouting. They're taught by silence. And legends? They don't demand respect. They leave it behind.